The martini hit me before the words did, cold, sharp. The burn of alcohol sliding down my neck, seeping into the collar of my dress. An olive clung to my shoulder before sliding onto the floor. For a split second, all I heard was the clink of the glass, the scrape of a chair, and my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. I froze, breath stuck in my chest. This was supposed to be a celebration, a family dinner where we toasted to brighter days ahead. Instead, I sat there dripping gin while my son Andrew's eyes burned into me, and his wife Brooke's smile carried a satisfaction that chilled me more than the drink itself. Then came the envelope, thick, heavy, and dropped onto the table with a thud that seemed to echo louder than any voice in the restaurant. I picked it up, fingers trembling, and pulled out the papers. Numbers. Endless numbers. My eyes darted down to the total, and the blood drained from my face. $847,000. Not savings, not winnings. Debt. My mind reeled. That figure was larger than anything I'd ever handled in my life. Larger than my home. Larger than the hope I'd been clinging to since my husband passed. And here it was, slid across the table like a casual bill. Andrew wouldn't meet my eyes. Brooke sat straighter, her hand resting possessively on his arm. I felt the weight of years pressing on me, the sacrifices, the trust, the love poured out for a son who now sat silent while I drowned in betrayal. I wanted to scream. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I sat there, soaked and shaking, wondering how family could turn into strangers in the span of a single dinner. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about manipulation, about the cruelest kind of betrayal, the kind that doesn't come from enemies, but from the people you love most. And if you're wondering how I ended up here humiliated, blindsided, and staring at a debt that wasn't mine to pay, I need to take you back. Back to where it started. Back to the choices, the trust, the cracks I ignored until they split wide open. Because nothing about this night was an accident, and the story of how it all unraveled is one I'll never forget. For most of my life, money was something I counted in single digits. A retired school teacher. I learned to stretch every dollar until it practically tore. My days were filled with grocery lists marked by sales tags, evenings with the hum of a quiet house, and nights where I prayed that the furnace would last through another winter. I wasn't miserable, just tired. Tired of choosing between fixing the roof and buying new shoes. Tired of always being careful. Then came the numbers. I remember staring at that lottery ticket, reading it once, twice, then a third time as if the ink might vanish. $2 million. Even now the words feel unreal. I sat at my kitchen table in shock, my heart pounding like a schoolgirl who'd been handed the answer sheet to life itself. For the first time in decades, I let myself dream. My dreams weren't extravagant. I wanted the mortgage gone, a trip to Ireland to see the cliffs I'd only admired in postcards, and the comfort of knowing I could grow old without being a burden. Mostly, I wanted peace, the kind that comes when you no longer have to count pennies. That's when Andrew called more often. My son, who had once grown distant, suddenly found time for coffee, for long talks, for checking in. I told myself it was love, the kind of reconnection I'd always hoped for. And maybe, in some corner of his heart, it was. But there was also Brooke, his wife, whose gentle smiles carried advice about investments, portfolios, and opportunities. She spoke with confidence I didn't have, and I wanted to believe she had our best interests at heart. I was vulnerable, lonely, desperate for closeness, so I welcomed their sudden warmth. convincing myself that money wasn't just a blessing, it was a bridge that could bring us together again. When Andrew suggested we celebrate this new chapter as a family, I clung to the idea. I pictured laughter around the table, glasses raised, and maybe even the first steps toward healing. I didn't know then that the dinner I imagined as a beginning would become the stage for my undoing. I still remember the night I checked the numbers. My ticket lay on the kitchen counter under the soft glow of the overhead light. I read the first number matched. My chest tightened. The second matched. My breath caught. By the time I reached the last digit, my knees gave out, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. $2 million. The numbers blurred through tears I didn't even realize were falling. My body trembled. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. For years, I had lived in survival mode, stretching a pension check across weeks, whispering small prayers that nothing would break or need repair. Suddenly, all of that weight lifted. The house, the bills, the constant gnawing worry, it all melted into possibility. I let myself dream. Dreams that had been too fragile to voice before. Paying off the mortgage, securing my home so no bank could ever take it. Booking a trip to Ireland to finally stand on the cliffs I had only admired in photographs. Setting aside enough to age with dignity to know I wouldn't have to choose between heating and food. They weren't extravagant dreams, but they were mine, and for once, they felt within reach. Then Andrew called, my son's voice, once distant, suddenly warm again. He wanted to spend time with me, coffee, dinners, long talks. A part of me clung to it desperately, like a child reaching for sunlight after years of shade. Brooke, his wife, followed close behind. She spoke smoothly, always with certainty. Investments, strategies, financial growth, words that sounded important, but foreign to me. She assured me she could guide me, that I didn't need to worry about making mistakes. And I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that money wasn't just changing my life, it was mending my family. Still, beneath the glow of this sudden fortune, a small unease stirred. The way Brooke's hand lingered on Andrew's arm when she spoke about my winnings. The way Andrew's eyes darted away when talk of money grew too pointed. I brushed it aside. I told myself love had simply found its way back to me. When Andrew suggested we celebrate together, I lit up at the thought. A dinner to mark a new chapter, one filled with hope, laughter, and connection. I dressed that night with a heart full of fragile optimism, never suspecting that what I believed to be a beginning was about to turn into the cruelest twist of all. The house smelled faintly of roses and roasted garlic that night. When I walked into the dining room, I almost didn't recognize it. The table was draped in a crisp white cloth, a centerpiece of lilies and tall candles flickering like tiny sentries. The food had been catered, tiny hors d'oeuvres lined up like soldiers. Dishes far fancier than anything we ever ate together as a family. For a moment, I felt flattered, as if this was their way of honoring me. But then I noticed the details that didn't quite fit. Brooke's briefcase sat tucked neatly against her chair, closer to her than her wine glass. Who brings a briefcase to a celebration dinner? She smoothed the napkin across her lap with a kind of precision that felt rehearsed. Andrew kept glancing at me, then at her, his eyes darting away whenever I tried to meet them. He smiled too quickly, laughed too loud, as though trying to fill a silence I hadn't even heard yet. I sat there, folding my hands in my lap, willing myself to believe this was what I had always wanted. Family gathered, food shared, a moment of joy after so many years of scraping by. I let myself savor the flicker of candlelight against the wine glasses, the clink of silverware. I told myself this was love, and yet, beneath it, something gnawed at me. The air felt thick, rehearsed. Brooke's voice rang out smooth, but without warmth, like she was performing for an audience that hadn't yet arrived. Andrew kept reaching for his glass, sipping nervously, his fingers tapping against the stem. I tried to shake it off. I told myself not to be suspicious, not to ruin the night with doubts. After all, hadn't I prayed for this laughter, togetherness, a table filled with family? I forced myself to swallow the unease, to smile when they looked my way. Still, my eyes kept drifting back to that briefcase by Brooke's chair. Its presence loomed larger than the flowers, larger than the candles. Something about it whispered that the evening was not about celebration at all. As I lifted my fork, my chest tightened. I didn't know what was inside, but I felt it waiting for me, like a storm gathering just beyond the window. And in that moment, I understood I was standing at the edge of something, and it was about to break open. Brooke leaned down, unlatched her briefcase, and with the precision of someone conducting a ritual, slid a thick envelope across the table toward me. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. The candles flickered, shadows stretching across the papers as I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were not family photos, not a handwritten note of love, but pages of numbers and names that might as well have been written in fire. Total debt $84,700. The figure screamed at me, burned into my vision. Beneath it, line after line, charges from luxury stores I had only ever seen in magazines. Weeks at five-star resorts, spa treatments stacked like they were necessities, and at the bottom, a lease for a BMW. My breath caught. My chest tightened until it felt like I might faint right there at the table. For a split second, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe this was paperwork they wanted me to look over. Maybe they were showing me what not to do. But the weight in Brooke's eyes, the tension in Andrew's jaw, it said otherwise. The words weren't spoken aloud, yet I could hear them in the silences. Family helps family. We need you. This is what you're here for. It wasn't a request. It was a demand dressed in the thin veil of obligation. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. Each line item another cut into the future I had imagined for myself. Mortgage freedom. Ireland. A cushion of peace in my old age. All of it suddenly threatened, reduced to nothing but numbers bleeding red off the page. Andrew leaned forward, his eyes soft with rehearsed guilt, the kind of look a child gives when they already know they've crossed the line. And Brooke sat tall, confident, the briefcase now closed like a coffin beside her chair. Their presence pressed against me, their expectation thick in the air. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. Instead, I sat still, heart pounding in my ears, letting the shock carve its mark deep into me. And then, beneath the panic, something else began to stir. A quiet, stubborn thread of resolve. This was not love. This was not family connection. This was manipulation, plain and cold. My retirement, my small slice of peace, I would not let it become their bailout button. I folded the papers back into the envelope, slid it slowly across the table, and braced myself, because I knew the pushback was coming, and the real battle was about to begin. The silence after I pushed the envelope back across the table was heavy enough to crush the air from my lungs. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the pressure began, slow at first, then suffocating. Andrew leaned forward, voice low. eyes searching mine with that well-practiced blend of guilt and pleading. He reminded me that family doesn't turn its back on family. He said I owed it to him, that everything he was now, I had made possible. The weight of his words landed like bricks. He wasn't asking, he was telling me my love was conditional, proven only if I agreed. Brooke, meanwhile, shed the last trace of sweetness. Her charm sharpened into something colder, like glass-cutting skin. She painted pictures of ruin if I refused how selfish it would look, how ungrateful, after all, Andrew had sacrificed. Her eyes pinned me in place, daring me to argue. Then came the quiet blade of insult. What use did I really have for all that money at my age? The words stung worse than the martini that would come later. I felt the guilt pressing against my chest, pounding alongside my racing heartbeat. Images of my son as a boy flashed through me, scraped knees, birthday candles, the first time he called me Mom. Could I really say no to him? Could I risk losing what little relationship we had left? But beneath the panic, something steadier began to rise. I listened between their words, and what I heard was not love, not care, but hunger. They weren't trying to save themselves, they were trying to consume me, to swallow my peace whole and call it duty. The waves of manipulation came and went, but each time, I felt the undertow weaken. My breath slowed, my hands steadied. For the first time in years, I saw the game they were playing, and I refused to be their pawn. And then the ultimatum landed, sharp as a knife. If I refused, they said, it would show what kind of person I really was. The table seemed to tilt beneath me, and I realized we had reached the breaking point. What came next would not be words alone. It would be confrontation. It happened so fast, I almost didn't register it. 1 second, Brooke's glass was in her hand, and the next, the contents were splashing across my face. The shock of it stole my breath. Cold gin clung to my skin, stinging my eyes, the briny bite of olives burning in the corners of my mouth. Droplets ran down my chin and onto the silk blouse I had chosen so carefully, darkening the fabric like bruises blooming in real time. The humiliation hit harder than the liquid. My cheeks burned as though every judgment I had ever feared was suddenly alive, dripping down my skin for the world, or at least for my son to witness. I waited for Andrew to react, to defend me, to show a flicker of outrage, but he sat in silence, eyes darting away, letting Brooke's smug little smirk hang in the air like a banner of triumph. That silence was louder than any scream. For a moment, I felt stripped bare, betrayed not just by her cruelty, but by his absence. My own child, once the boy who ran to me with scraped knees, now frozen, complicit, choosing convenience over love. My chest tightened, and for an instant, I thought despair might drag me under. But then, in the middle of that dripping shame, something inside me shifted. The sting of alcohol on my skin became a brand of clarity. I realized, with a fierce, cold certainty, that love doesn't humiliate. Love doesn't demand my ruin under the guise of loyalty. What stood across from me wasn't family, it was hunger disguised as kinship. I straightened in my chair, wet blouse clinging to my back, and felt a steel thread running through me. Their game only worked as long as I played along, and I was done playing. That night, something in me snapped free, not broken freed. I knew, sitting there with gin dripping into my lap and silence ringing in my ears, that this was a line I would never let them cross again. This wasn't the end. It was the turning point, and I vowed right then that everything after this night would be different. I remember the silence after the glass hit me more than the sting of the gin. The room seemed to freeze. I reached for a napkin, dabbed my cheeks, wiped the droplets from my blouse. My hands didn't tremble. My pulse, once racing, had slowed. What startled me most was not the humiliation, it was the calm that settled in its place. For the first time that night, I really looked at them. Brooke, clutching her briefcase like it held the crown jewels. Andrew, shrinking into his chair, eyes darting anywhere but mine. They weren't family reaching for help. They were gamblers demanding a payout, dressing up their greed as obligation. And I saw it all, plain as daylight. I thought back to the years I had scraped by, clipping coupons, saying no to small luxuries just to keep the lights on. I had survived without their help. And now, with everything I had built for myself, they expected me to sign it away to carry the weight of their recklessness. That was not love. That was control. A strange clarity washed over me. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to explain. My refusal didn't have to come with apologies or justifications. It could be simple, clean. Inside my head, I said it over and over. No, not this time. Not at the cost of my future. Their words still circled me, accusations of selfishness, hints of guilt, but they bounced off a wall that had finally risen inside me. I would not be their safety net. I would not bleed my retirement dry so they could keep living beyond their means. I folded the napkin, placed it on the table, and rose. My chair scraped against the floor, a sound sharper than any word I could have spoken. As I walked away from that table, from the flowers and candles that had disguised a trap, I felt lighter. That dinner ended more than a meal. It ended the hold they thought they had on me. And stepping into the night air, I knew the real work ahead would be reclaiming my life on my own terms. The envelope on my doorstep was heavier than its paper weight. Inside, neat legal language spelled out something I never thought possible: my own son suing me. Andrew and Brooke claimed I had made promises to cover their debts, that I had reneged on some kind of unspoken contract. My hands shook as I read it, the words blurring, betrayal in ink. It wasn't enough to humiliate me at dinner, they wanted the courts to strip me clean. The weeks that followed were a blur of consultations and paperwork. I sat across from lawyers, answering questions about my life, my money, my son. Every meeting left me drained. Nights stretched long, sleep broken by fear. What if the court believed them? What if all I had left, the house, the savings, the fragile independence, was ripped away? It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about survival in old age. And yet the sharpest ache was knowing my only child had dragged me here. The courtroom felt like another world. Polished wood, the shuffle of papers, the low hum of whispers. Andrew sat across the aisle, eyes fixed ahead. Brooke perched beside him, her briefcase again clutched like armor. I wanted to scream, to ask them how they could do this. Instead, I sat silent, hands folded tight in my lap, heart pounding against my ribs. The case built like a storm. Their lawyer painted me as withholding, even cruel. My attorney countered with calm precision, asking for proof, for written agreements, for anything beyond their accusations. And then came the twist. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled, voice measured as he laid out the truth-extravagant credit card statements. Spa weekends, designer boutiques, A BMW lease all in Andrew and Brooke's names. No documents tying me to any promise. No paper trail, no evidence. I watched their faces shift, Brooke's confidence cracking, Andrew's jaw tight. The judge's words sliced through the performance. The lawsuit wasn't just weak, it was baseless. With a final gavel strike, the case dissolved. Relief came in a slow wave, not a cheer. I was vindicated, but hollow too. I had defended myself and won, but at the cost of family ties I once prayed could be mended. Walking out of that courtroom, I breathed air that felt lighter. Justice had sided with truth, yet in the quiet corner of my heart, I mourned the family I had lost long before the verdict was read. After the gavel fell, the dust didn't settle quietly. For Andrew and Brooke, the cracks in their carefully polished lives widened into canyons. Creditors circled like vultures. The designer handbags, the leased BMW, the weekend spa trips, all of it went under the auctioneer's hammer. Bankruptcy wasn't a word whispered anymore. It was splashed across documents and visible in the hollow look on Andrew's face. Neighbors noticed. Friends drifted away. The ones who had admired their lifestyle suddenly spoke of excess and irresponsibility. Their reputation unraveled as quickly as their finances. I didn't celebrate their collapse. Watching my son stumble so far, so fast, was its own kind of grief. But I couldn't save him, not at the cost of myself. That night at the dinner table had taught me that love twisted into manipulation is not love at all. What I could do was choose a different path with what remained in my hands. Instead of clinging to bitterness, I poured my energy into building something that might outlast me. I took a portion of my winnings and started a small foundation. Nothing flashy, nothing grand. Just a scholarship fund to help kids from families like mine once was. Children whose parents worked double shifts to put food on the table. The paperwork was dull compared to the drama I'd survived, but the purpose gave me steadiness. Each check I signed felt like a thread tying me back to something true: hope, opportunity, dignity. The contrast wasn't lost on me. While Andrew and Brooke's world narrowed, mine quietly expanded. Not in yachts or mansions, but in meaning. Betrayal had broken me open. Yes, but it also cleared space for a new kind of legacy. I won't pretend it was painless. There are nights when I still wish things had been different. When I ache for the son I thought I had. But as the foundation grew, so did my sense of peace. Their downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was choosing not to let their choices define me. And in that choice, I began to see the real lesson this winding, bitter, and strangely beautiful journey had given me. It happened when I least expected it. After months of silence, after courtrooms and headlines and sleepless nights, Andrew showed up at my door. No grand gestures, no polished words, just him, looking smaller than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, his eyes red-rimmed, the weight of everything he had lost etched across his face. My first instinct was to guard myself, to brace for another plea, another angle. But instead, he simply admitted what I had longed to hear, that he had been wrong. He spoke of greed, of blindness, of how Brooke's influence had sharpened his worst instincts. He confessed to letting money matter more than love. Hearing it, I felt my chest tighten. For so long I had replayed his betrayal like a loop, wondering if he even recognized what he'd done. Now, faced with his brokenness, I couldn't deny the truth. This was my son. Still, hurt does not dissolve in a single moment. Part of me wanted to cling to anger, to remind him of the martini dripping down my face, the lawsuit, the sleepless nights. Another part, the mother part, wanted nothing more than to hold on to this fragile piece of honesty and not let it slip away. I told him I couldn't forget. That trust was not a switch to be flipped. But I also told him I was glad he came. That apology mattered. That love, though battered, was not entirely gone. His eyes softened then, and for the first time in years, I glimpsed the boy I had once raised. We didn't reconcile everything that day, but something shifted. A door cracked open, not wide, but enough to let in a little light. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about allowing a future, however imperfect, to exist. Looking back now, I see a story that began with betrayal, but ended with clarity. What I thought was the worst night of my life, the sting of a martini on my face. The cold papers of a lawsuit turned out to be the moment I learned what real strength looks like. I learned that resilience is not about never breaking. It's about standing up even when your heart feels shattered. I learned that boundaries are not walls of cruelty, but lines of self-respect that protect the life you've built. And I learned that forgiveness does not mean forgetting or excusing it, means choosing to release the weight of bitterness so you can walk forward lighter. Money was at the center of all of this. But in the end, it was never about the money. It was about love, dignity, and the courage to say no when saying yes would have destroyed me. Wealth can buy comfort, but it cannot buy integrity. And integrity is what I carry with me into every tomorrow. Even with Andrew's apology, the wounds don't vanish. But that small crack of light reminded me that redemption is always possible, even if the relationship looks different than before. Sometimes, healing is not about going back. It's about moving forward with a new kind of honesty. If there's one truth I want you to take from my story, it's this: never trade your self-worth for someone else's approval. Stand tall, even if your voice shakes. Love deeply, but guard your dignity fiercely. And if my journey spoke to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share this story with someone who needs courage today. Leave a comment, let me know your reflections, and don't forget to like and subscribe so more people can find these lessons. We're all walking our own paths, but sometimes our stories light the way for each other.